I want to begin by talking a little bit about what is the question, or what is the problem to which this immense book, of which you're only reading, I don't know, a couple of hundred pages maximum. What is the problem with which this huge book is concerned? It's always an important question to ask when you begin a new book. What question is the author trying to ask, or what problem is he trying to deal with? Let me try to set up Tocqueville's problem in the following way. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the ideas of freedom and equality seemed to walk confidently hand in hand. Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, who we've been reading, all believed that in the state of nature, remember, we were all born free and equal. As long as the enemy appeared to be the entrenched hierarchies of power and privilege of the old regime, of the old monarchical societies, freedom and equality were taken to be mutually reinforcing aspects of the emerging democratic order. But it was not until the beginning of the 19th century, with the emergence of the democracies or proto-democracies of Europe and the New World, that political philosophers, political thinkers began to wonder whether freedom and equality did not in fact pull in different directions. Tocqueville in particular, although you could add the names like Benjamin Constant or John Stuart Mill, but Tocqueville in particular saw the new democratic societies as creating new forms of social power, new types of rule that represented, in some ways, organized threats to human liberty. What were these new forms of social power? These were, for Tocqueville, the new middle class, or what we might call bourgeois democracies, the new middle class democracies emerging in countries like France, England, and of course the United States. And the problem for Tocqueville, or his question, as it was for Locke and others before him, was how to mitigate the effects of political power. How does one control or mitigate for political power? Yes? Right? You can see that. Locke's answer, you recall, to this problem was to divide and separate the powers. Separated powers, a theme clearly taken up and endorsed by the American constitutional framers. But Tocqueville was less certain that this kind of institutional device, so to speak, of checks and balances or separated powers could be an effective or truly effective check in a democratic age where you might say the people as a whole had become king. He was less certain that institutional remedies alone could work. While 75 years before Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America, Rousseau had taken up the doctrine of popular sovereignty to be an ideal to be worked for, taking men as they are and laws as they might be. He looked to the doctrine of popular sovereignty as something that could be. But Tocqueville, again writing approximately 75 years after Rousseau, saw this doctrine of popular sovereignty that for mid-18th century Frenchmen had looked like a far-flung utopian ideal. For Tocqueville, this ideal had become an altogether political reality that had taken shape in the backwoods of Jacksonian America. Consider just the following passage from the Democracy. In the United States, Tocqueville writes, the dogma, he says, he calls it the dogma of the sovereignty of the people, is not an isolated doctrine that is joined neither to habits nor to the sum of dominant ideas. On the contrary, he says, one can view it as the last link in a chain of opinions that envelops the Anglo-American world as a whole. And he goes on to say that extended to the entirety of the nation, this opinion becomes the dogma of the sovereignty of the people. So here you have Tocqueville's view that this Rousseauian concept of popular sovereignty has become an existent reality. And for Tocqueville, there was no reason to believe that the new democratic states emerging again in America and in Europe, these new democratic states ruled by the people, there was no reason to believe that they will be more just or less arbitrary than any other previous kind of regime. For Tocqueville, no person or body of persons can be safely entrusted with political power. And the united power of the people, the united sovereignty of the people, is no more for him a reliable guarantor of freedom than any other kind of regime. So the problem of politics, you might say, in an age of democracy is the problem of how to control the sovereignty of the people. For Rousseau, you remember, that was never really seriously a problem. The general will, he says, cannot err. The people, when they are ruling in their collective capacities, cannot be wrong. But Tocqueville was less certain about this. Whether or not the people, in their collective capacity as sovereign, are an infallible guide. The question is, what can be done about that? In aristocratic ages, you might say, the answer was simple. Tocqueville believed that in aristocratic times, there were always countervailing centers of power. Kings, no matter how powerful, always had to contend with a fractious and warlike nobilities. But again, who or what can exercise that countervailing power in a world where the people, in their collective capacity, have, to repeat, become the king? Who or what has the power to check the popular will or the general will? This is the problem. How to check democratic power. This is the problem that Tocqueville's new political science, what he boasts in the introduction to the book, is a new political science for a world itself quite new. This is the problem that he sets out to answer. And to this extent, I would also say, we are all Tocqueville's children. We are all disciples of Tocqueville insofar as our political science continues to deal with the problem of the guidance and control of democratic government. How to, you might say, combine popular government with political wisdom. How to do that remains a problem, you might say, akin to squaring the circle, but it remains the fundamental problem for democracies, how to combine popular rule with political wisdom. That was really what Tocqueville was concerned about. But before going on, let me ask, who was Alexis de Tocqueville? Let me tell you something about him. Tocqueville was born in 1805 into a Norman family from the north of France, from Normandy, with an ancient lineage. The Tocqueville estate still stands today and is owned still in the hands of members of the Tocqueville family. I know because I visited it a couple of summers ago and met his heirs. Although they are not actually the heirs of him directly. Tocqueville and his wife had no children. They belonged to one of the brother's side of the family. But absolutely charming people. Exactly what you think French aristocrats would be like. All charm and grace. Wonderful hosts. And Tocqueville was deeply attached to his ancestral home. in a letter from 1828, one of my favorite Tocqueville letters, he wrote to a friend, "Here I am," after returning from a trip away. "Here I am, finally at Tocqueville," referring to the home simply by the family name. "I am finally at Tocqueville in my family's old broken-down ruin. At a league's distance, I can see the harbor where William the Conqueror set sail for England. I am surrounded by Normans whose names figure among the conquerors. All of this, I have to confess, tickles my heart." So he comes from a line of people who trace their ancestry back to the Norman conquest and have been in that part of France for centuries. In fact, the Tocqueville home is a short drive away from the Normandy beach where the big D-Day invasion took place, you know, during World War II. It's a miracle that the home still survives. Tocqueville's parents had been arrested during the French Revolution and were held in prison for almost a year, and only the fall of Robespierre in 1794 saved them from execution. The young Tocqueville was born under the Napoleonic dynasty and spent his formative years, his adolescence and his school years, under the most conservative, if not to say reactionary, circles of post-revolutionary France. Tocqueville studied law in Paris, and during this time he made the acquaintance and friendship of another young aristocrat by the name of Gustave de Beaumont. And in 1830, for reasons that are not altogether clear, when he was 25 or so, in 1830, the two men received a commission from the new government of Louis Philippe, King Louis Philippe, to go to the United States